Welcome back, everybody, to the Assertive Podcast. I'm Erica.
I'm Jess.
And we are licensed professional counselors in Texas, reviewing Am I the Asshole Reddit threads to help you learn skills for communication, healthy boundary setting, and assertive interpersonal functioning. We are continuing our series on the 6 core emotions. Today, we've reached our last one, shame. So we're going to talk all about shame today with the post titled, Am I the asshole for having enough of my father's narcissism? So my husband and I got married in November of last year. We're both in our 30s, and my parents are in the picture, but his mother isn't because of the same issue I'm having with my father. My father has displayed narcissistic personality disorder since I was a child, calling me a bitch when I was 10 and me walking on eggshells whenever I was around him so he wouldn't be upset. My mother has always been the enabler, and whenever he was in one of his moods, he would start a fight, then gaslight. I didn't hesitate to tell him when his behavior was harmful, but no one has believed me about his personality, as he is charismatic and makes everyone believe he is a nice guy. That was until my husband and I got married. We were living with them for a short time before we got our apartment. They offered that we could still do laundry at their house once we moved out, since our apartment doesn't have a washer or dryer. They are in the process of selling their house, so since my husband and I work full-time jobs, I didn't want to show up to do laundry when they were having house showings, so I'd always call to ask if we could come over. My mother is easily manipulated and is now showing the same agitation my father does and said, "Why do we have to tell you everything?" Mind you, I have done everything myself for years, so this statement showed me how much gaslighting I have endured. My husband was listening to this and became upset. My husband then told me about how my father was stressing over a showing a while back, and he patted him on the shoulder to reassure him, and my father then goes to my mother to say he was uncomfortable with my husband doing that. Before we were even married, my father would threaten me saying, "Your husband will find out what sort of person you are if you make me look bad, and he won't love you anymore." When I would get upset and tell him I've had enough, he calls my husband to say I'm overreacting and I'm insane. Recently, with this laundry thing, I was excited about something and called my mother, but I got treated like I was a nuisance. And my husband, being an observer, says they seem to focus only on the negative and make me focus on it too. I told my mother I'm tired of the abuse, and she calls my husband to complain about me going silent. So, am I the asshole for having enough? Update. My father has also sent a long text to my husband saying he doesn't know why I'm acting like this, and the constant emotional trauma for me is giving my mother anxiety and high blood pressure. For the record, she's always had both, and it's nothing new. She had an anemic episode a while back that caused her to have anxiety about everything. My father's trying to hurt my marriage, and I am tired of how he behaves. It's the last straw when he tries to convince my husband it was a mistake to marry me. So, am I the asshole?
Oh boy. Family's dramatic. My goodness. Wow. Okay. Yeah. What are your first impressions of this one?
I thought this was very chaotic, but pretty aligned with an emotionally immature parent. I don't know if I would go as far as saying like narcissistic personality disorder, but definitely some emotional immaturity and some family dysfunction going on in this one.
Yeah, I think people throw that term personality disorder around quite loosely. That is a major diagnosis to give. We don't use that lightly in the clinical world. But yeah, it sounds like whenever she maybe calls dad out for his behavior, he deflects and maybe blame shifts or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was really struck by the level of triangulation that's going on. Like,
yes,
the fact that the husband keeps picking up the phone to listen to how his wife is insane and kind of participating in those dialogues still. I mean, he needs to support his wife. I understand the author and her husband talking about that, but yeah, that's just kind of bizarre that both parents are calling the husband to complain about the author. That's pretty messy boundaries going on there. Goodness.
Yes.
Oh, so shame. So I guess, as you know, if a listener has not revisited the first, what are we on, like 10 episodes, I guess now, of this 6 core emotions. So go back and listen to the first 5, but a general framework of the 6 core emotions is this idea that emotions are neither good nor bad. They're simply signals of things that we need to respond to. And so what healthy coping looks like is knowing the emotion that you're experiencing it, knowing its function, and then resolving it. So it's not to not feel the feelings or to shut them down, and emotions aren't bad. We just have to know what they're telling us.
Mm-hmm.
So with shame, what do you tell your clients is the point of shame?
Yep. I tell clients shame keeps us aligned with our values. And so when we experience shame, it's a sign that we've broken one of our internal rules or we're acting against our own values.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit in either the emotion, for sure in the emotions 101, I think we did it in guilt, but a lot of times we will experience shame and guilt together because our own personal values are often influenced by the larger groups of religious or society and family rules that they have. We're also internalizing those for ourselves. So it's common to see guilt and shame together because of that. When we don't experience enough shame, we become narcissistic. When we are experiencing too much shame, we have self-loathing or feel worthless.
Yeah. So if I have the internal rule of like, I should be nice to people, and then I go push down a little kid at the grocery store, I would feel appropriate shame.
Yes.
I had broken my rule and done something unkind. So
Mm-hmm.
that wouldn't be a negative emotion at that point, because that is a healthy response to that.
Yeah, you should feel shame. If you are doing things, I said this to somebody recently, well, you did things outside of your value system. Shame is the appropriate emotion to feel. But if you keep beating yourself up, then you're not coping with that emotion.
I was thinking, I don't think we've talked about this before, the term called cognitive dissonance.
Oh, I don't think we have.
Yeah, I think that might be a good point to talk about this. So I think cognitive dissonance is the idea that if we have a belief system and then we observe ourselves doing something against that belief system, it creates this kind of mental distress for us. So I gave my clients the example of, like, say that I used to be a cigarette smoker. And so I've changed my identity and I say, I'm somebody who does not smoke cigarettes anymore. But I've had a relapse and I'm smoking a cigarette and I walk past a window and I see myself smoking. There's going to be this moment where I only have 2 options. I either need to change my belief system or I need to change my behavior. And those are the only ways to resolve that cognitive dissonance. Otherwise, I'm going to be in this state of feeling shame. So either we need to say, actually, you know what? I am a smoker. I love smoking. I'm going to smoke for the rest of my life until I'm dead. This is fine with me. Or we have to quit smoking, because there's like that tension there. And so cognitive dissonance is this concept we talk about in therapy that can kind of help highlight these experiences where we're breaking these own internal rules that we have. And aligning with them can be a helpful thing to like rebuild self-esteem and feel congruent with ourselves. Yeah, I don't think that's come up yet, cognitive dissonance.
It hasn't, shockingly.
I know, it's like that's what like motivates us to change. It's like the essence of growth. Yeah, pretty important concept. But yeah, so if you guys notice somebody kind of feeling uneasy or maybe kind of talking themselves into something, you're watching them kind of work through some cognitive dissonance. Yeah. So what do you think? So like when we talk about too much and not enough, like what is the risk of being a narcissist, or what is the risk of being self-loathing? Like, why is that problematic?
Being a narcissist, you put yourself at risk for alienation, which evolutionary wise, back when we were a collective society, we needed to be able to conform to some group norms and to establish some relationships because that's how we stayed protected. Now it's more so just interpersonal relationships. People don't really enjoy interacting with you. You're going to have a lot of probably social isolation. It's going to be hard for you to connect with people. Narcissists typically really struggle with empathy. So you're going to have a hard time being a supportive partner if you can't put yourself in their shoes and understand what they're experiencing.
Yeah.
On the flip side, the harm of too much shame and worthlessness is we never give ourselves a break. We never give ourselves compassion. We don't forgive ourselves. We constantly feel like we're the worst. And that's going to then kind of weave into some of these other emotions. And we're probably going to have patterns of hopelessness or helplessness, or we're going to have patterns of depressive states because we just don't feel like we're worth anything.
Yeah, I'm thinking too, when we look at like history, I think some of the tyrannical historical figures I would probably have diagnosed with narcissism. And I think about it in terms of like it's almost like the we talked about in anger, the high end of anger is rage, this idea of like dominating other people. And I think it's like prioritizing your own rules over the rules of everybody else's, so that you tend to violate step on other people's toes and kind of dominate other people. It feels very like power struggle-y, I think, when I think of shame.
Absolutely.
And then, you're not going to take care of yourself if you don't give a shit about yourself. You're not going to like show up or even bring strengths to like relationships, your job, if you don't think that you have them.
Very true.
How can you tell, or I mean, in your caseload, do you tend to have more people who lean towards narcissism or self-loathing?
Oh, self-loathing for sure.
Yeah, I find that too.
And as you were speaking earlier, I was like, I think I might be a shame therapist, because almost all of my clients, we are having conversations about self-worth and appropriate boundary setting. So we've talked about this before. I tend to have clients who are more in the worthless phase, passivity, hopelessness, helplessness. All of those are kind of tied together, and that makes sense. So yeah, way more. I think I've had, in private practice, I would say one narcissist. And when we were doing probation, I had at least one other, a potential other one, but he had some other mental health diagnosis going on, so it was hard to kind of tease out what was part of that diagnosis and what was part of maybe personality stuff.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I'm sure we're not getting a good sampling because narcissists don't come to therapy, basically.
That's true.
They might come about like with couples therapy sometimes. Maybe the partner who, not to be stereotypical, oftentimes a narcissist will pair with like a borderline perhaps, or they'll pair with somebody with really low self-esteem. So yeah, narcissists are not really going to come into therapy too much. I don't know that I've really had like I've had people definitely antisocial who like lack guilt, but I don't know that I've really, in my professional life, experienced too many like narcissistic personality disorders.
Yeah, they're interesting.
They are. People throw that term around, right? Like you can
my God, I hate that.
You can have narcissistic traits, but to say you have a narcissistic personality disorder, I would like to kind of clear the air. Do you have your DSM out?
I sure do.
Can you read it? Can you read for our listeners what the true diagnostic criteria is? Because this is like calling somebody bipolar. That is a major, or schizophrenic. That's a major mental health issue. So that I don't want people to use this lackadaisically.
Correct. All right. Criteria: a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, need for admiration, and lack of empathy, beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 or more of the following. Has a grandiose sense of self-importance, such as exaggerates achievements and talents, expects to be recognized as superior without commensurate achievements. 2, is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. 3, believes that they are special and unique and can only be understood by or should be associated with other special or high status people. 4, requires excessive admiration. 5, has a sense of entitlement. 6, is interpersonally exploitative, so takes advantage of others to achieve their own ends. 7, lacks empathy, is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. 8, is often envious of others or believes that others are envious of them. And 9, shows arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes. So out of those 9, You have to have at least 5.
Mm-hmm.
They have to cause disruption in areas of your life, like relationships, work, education. So when you say like somebody has some narcissistic traits, maybe they have less than 5, so they're not getting the diagnosis, but they're still showing some problematic interpersonal skills.
Yeah, and for somebody to get a diagnosis, it's where they are not functioning in life because this is so problematic, right? And so most people, when they say, "Oh my God, this person has narcissistic personality disorder," it's like just because they, talk over you or always have a preference of where you go eat, like, talk about like for somebody to have a personality disorder, they're not able to maintain relationships. They have a hard time holding jobs. So a person who's narcissistic, they have something like having a boss is sometimes intolerable to them.
Yep.
They're unable to like hold jobs. They continue to cause a lot of harm to like loved ones. And I think it's a pretty intense experience. I think I've known one true narcissist. And it is unpleasant to be in a relationship with that person. But yeah, it's pretty extreme. And I think we throw it around lightly. Have you met like a true narcissistic personality disorder?
In my personal life?
Just in life, like you've professionally, personally.
Professionally, I had that one.
Yeah.
And I'm really trying to think in my personal life. I don't think so. But yeah, I think just professionally, I don't think I've come across a true narcissist in my personal life.
Yeah.
Knock on wood.
Knock on wood. I probably, as a therapist, I am probably inclined to being where it would take a lot for me to diagnose a female with narcissistic personality, and it would take a lot for me to diagnose a male with borderline. I'm probably lean towards maybe being a little bit biased in that way. I probably should look at that more. But I don't see that quality as often in women, I've noticed. But I don't know. Erica's looking off thinking.
I know. I'm going through like some of the women. And I think I get this a lot with borderline clients. It's just like this feeling.
Yeah.
Like I can tell like borderline energy. Even like telehealth, I'll do a consult and I'll be like, borderline.
Yeah. You feel it. Yeah, you do feel that.
So I was trying to think if I've gotten that feeling with like a guy or vice versa. You get a very similar energy with narcissism.
Yeah. I agree.
So I'm trying to think, and I don't think I've seen the reverse. Not to say it doesn't happen. I'm sure it does. But yeah, in my personal and professional life, you're right.
It's rare.
I think men tend to lead kind of narcissistic and women tend to lean borderline, sorry, which may have something to do with gender norms and narratives in society. That would be interesting for somebody to study.
And I think too, like men, I think are more encouraged towards like achievement or even, even like public roles, like politicians and things like that. And I think borderline is often more associated with like internal image and then like relationship functions, which I think tend to be common in women. And I think maybe the sensation you're describing when I interact with somebody who's leaning narcissistic or borderline is the sensation that like I'm at risk of this person trying to manipulate me. It's like you like feel yourself having to sort through some bullshit, I think is the sensation I notice in myself.
That's another thing, another risk of worthlessness and having too much shame is we don't trust our own instincts, which even people who are not trained in psychology, when they interact with these folks, they get this weird little feeling.
Sort of red flag, right?
Yeah.
Red flag is.
And so when we have too much shame, we don't listen to that because we don't believe it. We don't believe in ourselves.
Right. And so when I think about the dynamic with her parents, she said, my mom's really easily manipulated. That tends to be the only person who would tolerate someone with narcissistic personality disorder is somebody with low self-worth. Because if anybody has boundaries or steps up to them, the narcissist can't tolerate that. So it almost necessitates that somebody not be able to trust themselves when somebody's doing something icky.
Yeah.
Relationship with that person. Another term that's thrown around a lot is like gaslighting.
Yes.
Which I think is often paired with when we talk about narcissistic personality disorder, what would you like? How do you talk about gaslighting? And like, or I think it's thrown around too much. Like, do you think so too?
I
Gaslighting?
do as well. I think people jump to that word. That's what they assign to the behavior first, versus trying to be compassionate and coming up with other plausibilities for why they have that perspective, right? It's their initial instinct is to say they're gaslighting versus, oh, we had a different perspective on this.
Yeah. Just so, if the listener, if you're not sure what gaslighting, basically it's somebody in their response is trying to make you think you've misunderstood reality. So I think a really common example is I hear it with like cheating, where maybe one partner finds that the other person has been unfaithful. They address the other person and they say like, that is crazy. Why would you think that? This is you being paranoid, kind of like switching it on them. And that person knows that they've engaged in like infidelist behavior. So I think that's kind of when I think about gaslighting, is that the person is intentionally making you think that you don't know reality to protect themselves, where because you think something differently, or somebody has a bad memory, that's not gaslighting. That's just that or maybe they're embarrassed and they're kind of deflecting because they feel uncomfortable and they don't, they're not ready to talk about something. It is different than like overtly trying to manipulate somebody's view of what is real. That's a much more intentional function. And I think I noticed that I think women tend to accuse men of gaslighting more. Do you find that also? I don't know why I keep bringing up these gender norms. It's not that important, but I noticed these like really distinctive patterns between my clients. And I think it's curious.
I don't think so. Only I work with a lot of adult children of emotionally immature parents. And so I think I get it equal because I'm hearing like mom did this or dad did this.
Ah, okay.
I occasionally will get it in partnerships, and I do tend to work more with women, so that may be some skewed data.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I probably get pretty even.
Okay.
Even distribution there.
Okay. Maybe it could just be even from like social media. I think maybe I'm hearing that term tossed around a little bit more than it used to be. But and what I think when talk about kind of categories where I notice too much shame, I think it comes out the most when we get into things like body image or yeah, would you say that's true for you too? Where do you think it, like what kind of domain do you think you hear most shame talk come out?
I would say like body image, relationship domains.
Yeah.
Shame comes out quite a bit. I would say even work, I get quite a bit where they don't want to go for the promotion or they don't want to put their name in if there's like a different like job opening because they just don't think they'll get it so they don't even try.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's necessarily one domain I see for my clients. I think it's pretty evenly scattered across the domains of life.
Okay. I think it comes up in relationships a lot because I think it's, and especially we talk about like within families, I think people get so focused on caring for other people that they stop caring for themselves. And I think so I think it's really common. I think like I hear like I think moms struggle with this a lot of like feeling like everybody else's time is more important than theirs, and they don't want to protect that time to take care of themselves. And I think shame, or I mean I guess body image, I think, and we're very aesthetically focused culture also. So I think a lot of that, and especially women, I think we get messages of you are only as valuable as you are attractive.
Yep.
And so I think that can be really hard to feel worthwhile if we don't feel sexy or pretty or whatever that is. But I think guys have a hard time with body image too. I think that they're more stigmatized like with talking about it, but almost every single guy I work with, we talk about body image and like the relationship like with their body, and most people have challenge points there.
Yeah,
especially like guys getting sober. What's really happens cross genders, you get sober, you stop drinking and using drugs, and you start eating a lot more. It's really common, or like you stop smoking. It's really common to gain weight when you've come out of like an addictive thing. And it happens all the time when we would do groups where like they kind of like, oh my gosh, my clothes don't fit anymore, and they kind of joke about it. And I'm like, how, that sounds kind of uncomfortable. Are you having a hard time? And they'd be like, yeah, I really hate my body. And I'm like, damn. But like guys won't talk about that as openly, but they're just as susceptible.
Yeah, that's true. As you were saying that, I was thinking to the guys on my caseload, and absolutely.
Yeah.
That rings true. And we've talked about it. We have conversations about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah. So ladies, tell your men they're sexy, and compliment them when they look good in an outfit, because they want to hear that kind of stuff too, just like you do.
Yeah. Very true. Very
Mm-hmm.
true. It's interesting, we talked about different relationship dynamics and what that looks like into adulthood. And one thing you said at the beginning when we kind of did our first impression was the triangulation, which for those who don't know, in relationships, if you have two people in a relationship and you pull in another one to balance it instead of just fixing it amongst the two people. So, mom and author are having an issue. Instead of them fixing it, they're pulling in the husband to balance them out and to resolve that issue. And you mentioned he should have set some boundaries there. And when you said that, I initially thought, well, he's just getting stuck in his own pattern because he's had the same relationship with his mother. He was able to cut off his mother.
Yeah.
But then he's having a more difficult time to break that pattern because he's just so used to it because of his own mom.
That's a good point. I didn't and that was kind of like a white noise sentence, but yeah, that's true. They are both operating with narcissistic parents.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the shame that's going on here, it mostly sounds like the author is feeling like her dad's trying to leverage shame to change her behavior in some way, or to say, hey, if you do anything to tarnish my grandiose self-image, I'm going to use shame to destroy your relationship. And it's being weaponized here. And the author is saying something like, I told him I have enough. I let him know when he's upsetting me. Those are still not boundaries. He's like, I've had enough with that. What does that even mean? And so I think that maybe what feels like trying to take some space. I don't think any of the 4 participants in this post actually know how to go about healthy separation. I don't think they really know what that means. They're kind of just, I think it sounds like she's, I've never had a hard time telling him if he bothered me. But again, she's kind of reverse ripping on him. I don't think that it's really her protecting herself. I think she's just probably saying something like, you're being a huge asshole or something, which it's not productive here.
When it comes to setting boundaries and going no contact, do you have a way that you introduce that to clients? Here, it sounds like she hasn't set any boundaries and then she's going straight to no contact. Would you address this therapeutically with her?
Yeah, I would. And I think it takes a lot for a client to get to the point of saying, I don't want this person in my life at all. Lots of times they'll even say, I'll kind of ask somebody's willingness of how much involvement they still want to have. So I think for somebody to say, I want this person gone, I usually frame that as this is probably a temporary need to have really strong, rigid boundaries for a little while until we find a more middle of the ground way to have it. I think if a client is to the point where they want to cut somebody off, I will usually think that there's probably a pretty good reason for that at that point. I tend to try. I mean, one of my foundational core beliefs as a therapist is that I think that everybody makes sense given their context. I think that, I'm looking out the window. If the neighbor outside the window, if I'd had the same genetic cards, if I had the same parents in the upbringing, I would make all the same decision that this person's making. There's nothing immune. We're all equally susceptible to that. So when a client says, I need this person out of my life, I tend to think that it's probably valid. So I think I would probably say something like, I set a timeline on it, saying what would you need? So let's say, okay, I would kind of have a hard time with her grandmother. And so I say, okay, what has gotten this to this point where you think that this is a no contact? What has it been like in the past if you try to set boundaries? And so if somebody shows a pattern of attempted and that person continues to disregard it, I'll kind of say, okay, well, let's go no contact for a little bit. That person's going to be upset. Let's see how that goes. I think what might be down the road I'd like to see is us figuring out how to have this person in your life in a way that's safe and appropriate. But if you feel like an overcorrection needs to happen, I can understand that. And then I would say something like, what would you want to see to know that you're ready to start maybe opening that up a little bit? So I'll kind of have their back in that overcorrection. And then over time, I'll kind of have them check in to see if they're ready to soften it. So I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you try to have them kind of do a more harm reduction first before going so extreme?
If their end goal is to have some sort of relationship, I do. And I tell them what we risk here is that they retaliate and go no contact with you. And then we're unable to do any repair work. So I think it's fair to try and set some few boundaries, do some boundary enforcement. So for this client, I would say if your husband gets a call and your mom starts talking about a problem she has with you, he needs to set the boundary of, I don't want to be involved in your argument. Please talk to her directly with that. Was there anything else you wanted to discuss today? If she's like, nope, or she keeps going, then he would say, again, this is an issue between the two of you. I don't want to get involved. I'm going to go ahead and hang up now. I hope you have a good day.
Absolutely.
Right. And if this keeps happening, then I'm going to be unable to accept your phone calls. I really hate having to do this, but every time you call me, end up having to end the conversation. I'm sure that doesn't feel good for you to be hung up on. I don't feel good having to do it. So I think it's best if I just don't pick up the phone anymore. If you have issues or you need to talk to us about something, go through your daughter.
Love that boundary.
So just kind of slowly seeing, because sometimes they'll course correct.
Oh, right? Yeah.
So mom, she may be more able to course correct. She may be like, oh, if I don't get my shit together, he's not going to talk to me. Whereas dad may have a harder time with that. So I try and have them set some boundaries if it doesn't work. Again, we talked about this and how do we set a boundary if we don't want to just come in and cut people off and then say, well, that's my boundary. Well, we didn't really set a boundary. We just cut them off and we made that decision. So we want to give them a warning of what's going to happen and give them opportunity to do that instead of just saying don't talk to me about your daughter and hang up. That's not appropriate. We need to let them know, hey, I don't want to talk about this. This is between the two of you. If we continue, I'm going to have to disconnect.
And I think I would also take into account the level of injury that's being inflicted, right? If this person, right, if my dad was calling my husband, calling me a bitch, saying that I'm insane, I don't really know that I'd be like, I don't really owe you an explanation. You should know that this is totally inappropriate. So, and again, I think it depends, not that we're boiling down people to a risk benefit analysis, but it's what are the what positive things is this relationship with your dad bringing you aside from obligation because you're related? Is there potential here? So if it's just a bunch of negatives, I'd be like, you don't owe them. You don't have to pick up the phone. So I think or somebody's an abusive relationship, I'd say, do not, right? So it might depend on that, but I definitely think that the husband here can be setting some conversational boundaries. And I was kind of shocked by the lack of conversational boundaries that are happening. I don't know that the husband needs to go no contact. Again, if the author feels like she needs some space for her dad for a couple of weeks or months to get her head on straight and have some space, I get that. I think that there can be a time where going no contact for a short amount of time can help people come up for air and find ways to appreciate each other. But that's definitely not a blanket solution by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
There's
also the possibility the reverse can be true where they retaliate if you jump right into no contact. The other possibility is they know you're serious about this, and so maybe they respond a bit quicker to respecting boundaries.
Yeah, and we talked about boundaries a lot. Nobody likes having somebody set a boundary with them. We want to be able to do what we want, right, and get our needs met. People are always it's hard to tolerate boundaries, and I think being consistent on reinforcing that's where that comes in. So, I had to coach a client the other day about having conversational boundaries with her family, wanting to gossip with people about people, and so it's like you said, hey, I'm finding that we're on the phone, but I don't really get to know more about you. I don't want to talk about other people, but what's going on with the kids? How's work? And kind of just deflecting that. And then, okay, they keep bringing up the neighbor to say hey, I really don't want to hear about the neighbor. I called because I love you. Tell me more. And if not, I'm going to have to go ahead and end our phone call because I got a bunch of stuff to do. And just kind of, really softly. And I said, it's going to take a couple weeks or months, right? Because you've been operating this way with your sibling for years. That's how you guys bond, is kind of joint gossiping. So it's going to feel weird. That doesn't mean it's bad. Just change takes time, but that's hard here. I mean, and talk about am I the asshole? If we were to give a verdict here, what would you say on this one?
This one's so hard. I do just want to say I understand how hard it is to set boundaries as an adult with your parents.
Yeah.
And like you said, you feel like you owe them something, and at the same time, you have your own right as an individual human. And so you do get to set boundaries with your parents. And in a lot of like cultures or religions, there's just no room for that. It's respect your mother and father.
Yeah, and I don't know where respect your mother and father. I don't know why boundaries are so disrespectful. Like I never understood
Yeah.
that. Like, yeah. Telling somebody how they make you feel should not be disrespectful to them.
Yeah, it's almost a little bit of entitlement where parents feel they're entitled to treat us a certain way, or they're entitled to certain information about our life simply because they're our parents. And they forget that we are our own individual beings, and we do get to keep things to ourselves or make our own decisions and determine how we want to be spoken to.
Yeah, if somebody feels like you expressing a need or saying something made you feel a certain way is disrespectful to them, probably not a person you want to be investing too much time in. That's a person you don't want to be too vulnerable with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, boundaries are not offensive. I think they can be set in an offensive way.
Yes.
But I think if you're practicing assertive communication and being gentle, boundaries are not unkind.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Or have you ever heard the saying, I'm not being a bitch, I'm being honest? And I'm like, dude, you can be both. Just because you probably are also being a bitch.
Yeah. On our I don't know if you remember this, but like the communication style worksheet, I don't know if you ever used this when we did groups. But they like broke it down by animal, and so like the aggressive communicator I think was a tiger.
Oh.
But one of them was tactless honesty. And then for assertiveness, it's tactful honesty.
I like that. Okay.
So just because it's true doesn't mean it's tactful or that it's nice. And so I would use the example of shoes. If your friend says, hey, I got these new shoes, what do you think? When you say, oh, I hate those, I would never wear those. You are being honest, but that's really rude. And so a tactful honesty might say, I'm not sure I could pull those off, but you're doing like, this is great. I would have never thought to put those shoes with that outfit. That looks good.
You're doing your most you.
Right? Or those are really your personality. They're very bright. I tend to wear more muted tones, so I probably wouldn't have picked those for myself, but I actually really like them on you.
They match your personality. You're both ugly.
Right? So there's a way to kind of get around, like you don't have to lie to people, but you also don't have to be rude.
Yeah.
And that's part of assertive communication.
And I think that can be manipulative too if you're in a relationship with somebody where they say like, I'm just being honest, but it's really abrasive. That's you don't have to accept being spoken to that way. You can be kind and honest.
Yes.
There is such a thing. Yeah.
But yeah.
Tactful. That's a good word. Tactful. I like that.
So do I think the author's an asshole? What her initial question is, am I the asshole for having enough? No.
Right.
You are allowed to say when enough is enough for you. She's obviously leaning a bit towards worthlessness if she's not trusting her own internal system to say, like, we're done with this. And so she's come to Reddit to get some external validation for that. So, if we have appropriate levels of shame in our life, we can trust ourselves and say, nope, my system is telling me I'm done and I don't like feeling like this and I'm not going to feel like this anymore. I'm done with this. Potentially there's some assholiness in like communication styles. I'm not really sure how she's communicating with parents. She can maybe be a bit more assertive with them for sure. Same with her husband. He's not really helping the situation. Just falling into old, everything makes sense in context, right? So that little nugget of he has a parent who has some narcissistic tendencies, right? He's falling into his old childhood patterns. So I think that's easy for him to do. Does it make him an asshole? I don't think so. I think it makes him someone who needs to do some more work. And it probably tells me he went straight to like cut off versus attempting to set boundaries. Parents, I do think both parents are assholes because they are triangulating.
Yeah, I like that. I think everybody's messing up a little bit on. Yeah. I think that some people are messing up more than others, but I think everybody's got a part in this one.
Which is true with family dysfunctions. We talk about like family roles.
Yeah.
Right? What keeps the dysfunction going is everybody's continuing to play their role. When one person stops playing their role, all the other roles now have to shift and do something different.
I agree. I think the main opportunity here is probably with boundary setting. This kind of depends on the relationship, but I would almost think that like maybe in the situation, the daughter, the author, needs to be the one who's setting the boundaries about, contacting my husband and talking to
Yeah.
me in this way. And then I'd want my husband to kind of have my back on, not picking up the phone or whatever that would be, or shutting it down if it does pick up. But I think that the daughter needs to be communicating of like, I don't appreciate being name called.
Hmm.
I don't appreciate you going behind my back. I don't appreciate you bringing my husband into this. If this continues to happen, I'm going to have to take some space from our relationship here. I think that the mom and dad need to be talking to one another about any kind of issues that they have. If they feel like the daughter's stepping on their toes or is being invasive, they might need to have some boundary setting of, hey, you're asking a lot of questions, or hey, this isn't a good time for us to have you come over because there's showings. There's too much going on. We can't handle this
Hmm.
now. If they're continuing to like invite her in, and they're getting mad at her, it's like she's only meeting her needs. So if you don't want to offer her something, you need to tell her that. And then I think the husband's participating in the ickiness, and the dad is obviously kind of maybe self-interested in a lot of his feedback, trying to protect his
Hmm.
image and things like that. So I think they're all a little bit assholes. And again, the author talks about, I'm having enough, and I let him know what I don't like his behavior, but I don't know what that means. I imagine nobody here is having effective communication, I don't think.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, I think they all need some skills. It's not like dad maybe is the most aggressive person in this post, but they all got some work to do on
Hmm.
this dynamic.
Yeah. Also, I think with her, if she were my client, I would have a conversation of what is your self-esteem worth? Is it worth going to the ATM, pulling out some dollar bills, getting some change, and going to the laundromat? Like, you do not have
Oh,
to stay in this cycle. Like, it's not, I do my
right.
laundry at my parents' or I have no clean clothes. There are other options. You're choosing to engage with them in this when you know they get pissy with you when you ask when their showings are.
Totally. So true.
So, like, what's it worth to you? Is it worth the, $5 to go to the laundromat? I bet it is. You should just stop utilizing them.
Yeah, and if you feel like that your needs are really interfering with other people's getting their needs met, it might even be a courtesy to say, "Hey, obviously there's a ton of indications that this isn't really working for you, but I'm continuing to insist that I access this resource. Like maybe take a little bit out of consideration for somebody offering the laundromat,
Hmm.
you know?"
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
you have to do that anyway. They're about to move, so she's gonna have to figure that out here pretty soon.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine they'll take their washer and dryer with them, but
I get maybe because I always assume that people move really far away because that's how we always move. My family, we're all in different states all the time. But yeah, that's true. They could be moving down the road. Who knows? We're all over the place.
yeah. But yeah, she has other options. And so part of this is you're so used to this dynamic, you don't see options to leave this cycle.
Yeah, and that's probably what I would do. I'd probably be like, go do your laundry somewhere else. I'd probably like session one would be like, okay, this is causing a lot of conflict, and laundry's not that big of a deal here to
Hmm.
cause you to cut your dad off, so you don't have to go to the laundromat. Jesus.
Yeah. But I think that also perpetrates his importance in her life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you absolutely have to do your laundry there, you're essentially telling them, like, you're so important, I can't go to the laundromat, which only further feeds, his sense of grandiosity.
Yeah, that power differential of like I have
Yeah.
some kind of leverage going on here.
Hmm. You say, I actually don't need you for anything because I'm a full functioning adult and there are other resources available to me.
Right. And dad's like, well, now I don't have this power flex.
Or even saying, my husband's not going to leave me simply because you whispered in his ear. And it's offensive to think like he's that type of person. He spends all day, every day with me.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you're mad at me and you go tell him how mad at me you are, he's not leaving me. I'm not going to pick somebody like that.
Yeah. Yeah, this is all. And again, people make sense given their context. Maybe the author is a monster and her dad has all kinds of reasons for thinking her husband should run for the hills. I have no freaking idea. She could be totally nuts. Who knows? But
But also,
doubt
that's for the husband to find out on his own.
Yeah, that's the joys of marriage, is finding out in which way your partner is a psycho. You tolerate it, you learn about each other. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But yeah.
And I think as an adult, there's that natural breaking from the family of origin and like refocusing on your, the immediate family that you build for yourself. And I think protecting that marital unit is essential. And so I think the biggest issue here is the dad trying to dissolve their marriage and creating like conflict there. That even more than the narcissism or how he's talking to her, I think that is one of the biggest things here, is that that should not be going on there in that marriage. It's a problem.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Agree with that. You want to summarize this one for us?
Oh, pop quiz time. Okay. So we talked about shame. The function of shame is to tell us when we've broken one of our own rules. So if we have too much shame, that's where we get into self-loathing and worthlessness. Not enough shame, that's where we get into narcissism. Sometimes in extremes, it could be narcissistic personality disorder. Cognitive dissonance is this function where our behaviors and our values don't line up, so it makes us uncomfortable. So we can resolve that by either changing our behaviors or changing our beliefs. When we are in a state of like self-loathing and have too much shame, lots of times we will not protect ourselves because we don't feel like we're worth it. So this might look like having poor boundaries in relationship, maybe low self-care, not advocating for ourselves at work. We went to the diagnostic criteria of narcissistic personality disorder, and we gave a definition of gaslighting, which is where somebody makes you think that reality is not reality. Body image is a common issue for both male and female clients, and this can be a common domain of shame. What else? You can be a bitch and be honest. There is a way to be honest and kind, and that is like the essence of assertive communication. That's kind of what we're wanting y'all to get to a point at. So if you're being mean to people, you're not justified just because you're being honest. You're being mean, and that's not okay. What else?
We didn't necessarily talk about this, but we talked quite a bit about boundaries, and I think it can be hard to set boundaries if we're in that state of too much shame, because if we don't feel like we're worthwhile, or if we don't feel like we're worth anything, it's going to be hard to set boundaries to then assert our needs.
Totally.
So we get that this is hard. We're not saying, this is easy. You guys should just go out and do this. It takes a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of patience with yourself. But essentially, you are worth everything. You're worthwhile just by being here. You don't have to do anything to earn worthiness. You are alive. You are here on this earth. You deserve to have your needs met. Set your boundaries.
Yeah, inherent dignity just because you're a human.
Yep.
Yeah. So in episode 2, we'll get into the coping skills with shame. So we'll talk about, just kind of like views of self and self-image. We'll get into gaining self-esteem, get into some self-compassion and expectations.
It'll be fun.
Be good stuff.
All right, guys. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts. You can send them to us via email, assertivepodcast@gmail.com, or hit us up on Instagram @assertivepodcast. Until next time.